Good morning and welcome to this week's Wednesday morning Bible study. I am actually recording this on Wednesday morning this week. Didn't have the opportunity to get to it yesterday, so it wasn't out early this morning. So you may be getting this later this afternoon as Rebecca gets home and has a chance to post it in all the places she does. Again, I want to thank her for doing that. Thank all of you for joining in this Bible study. One of the things I truly enjoy doing is teaching, and this gives me a great opportunity to do that. I think back, quite a few years to when I was in junior high and actually thought I might want to be a teacher someday. And so I guess I have sort of come to that point anyway, as it is. So again, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoy this Bible study as much as I enjoy putting them together. You'll notice my background for today is the stained glass in the narthex of our church, something that, probably many of you haven't seen for a while. Sometimes we might not take a lot of notice of it from the inside as we're headed out of church on Sunday morning or whenever we're here. It is beautiful stained glass, and so I've chosen that for the background today. Again, I hope it's something that you enjoy seeing as I experiment with some different backgrounds and different ways of recording this service. I am recording this on Zoom, though it's not an open invitation Zoom meeting. There are no other participants as there are in many Zoom meetings. And as I expressed last week, I may think about doing Zoom Bible study sessions. And I assure you, some of you have said that, you don't use Zoom and you might not be interested in that. But if we do Zoom the Bible study so that we get some interaction from folks, that will also be recorded. And so you'll not only see what I have to offer, but you'll see and hear the input from other folks who might be able to join into those Bible studies whenever we record them. So, and they will still be posted in all the usual places on our church website, on YouTube, on Facebook. But they, again, if we decide to go that route, they will be recorded, but they'll be recorded with other folks besides myself interacting in those Bible studies. So again, something that is under consideration as we move into the future and look for new ways, different ways, and better ways to do things. And so again, I invite your feedback as we want to make this an enjoyable and meaningful experience for everyone. So please, again, feel free to offer me your feedback in whatever way you'd like to do that. And I assure you those are all taken into consideration. Our COVID task force met last night, Tuesday night, and we have decided to wait at least another 2 weeks. We're going to meet again on February 9th, I believe, whatever the Tuesday is that week. It'll give us time to watch the trends a little more, see how things are going. We have seen some improvement in the numbers. Not sure we're willing to take a chance yet on reopening or even on a limited basis. And we plan to hear from the bishop again before that February 9th meeting. So we'll have some guidance from him, also some input from other pastors and churches in the area. So for at least the next couple weeks, we will not be doing in-person worship. We will continue with the recorded worship services and keep you posted in whatever way we can as far as how and when we will be returning to in-person worship here in the church. We do not plan to have in-person worship on Ash Wednesday. That was a tough decision that the task force came to. We had quite a long discussion, talked about pros and cons back and forth. We will have a recorded Ash Wednesday worship service, and we will have a couple options for receiving ashes. We'll keep you posted again on how that might be done. You'll be getting some communications from the church by email, by phone, or perhaps a letter. But we will be having a recorded Ash Wednesday service that you can participate in. We will be having a couple ways to receive imposition of ashes. So please listen and watch for those announcements, and we'll keep you up to date as best we can on what's going on there. So this week, we are in the fourth Sunday after Epiphany. This coming Sunday is the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany. And I think before we get to that, as we've been looking at different saints' days, today, January 27th, right? Yes, January 27th is a day when we commemorate Lydia, Dorcas, and Phoebe, who were witnesses to the faith. And just a little background, Luke recorded that in the 40s, and that is not the 1940s, that is the 40s, a merchant of expensive purple cloth was a believer who offered her house in Thyatira, which is in Turkey, in service to the Christian community, perhaps for worship purposes. And that is in Acts 16, 14, and 15. Luke recorded that in the 40s, Dorcas, also named Tabitha, a resident of Joppa in Israel, was beloved for her assistance to the poor. When she died, Peter restored her to life. And that is in Acts 9, 36 to 43. And in the mid-50s, Paul wrote commending the work of Phoebe in Romans 16:1. She is praised as a benefactor of the Christian mission in Cenchrea in Greece. Paul calls her a deacon, which title has occasioned much discussion about what role she played and what were her responsibilities in the church. And we, of course, have deacons in our Lutheran church today. These three women represent three different Christian ministries. Lydia, a woman of wealth, was known for her hospitality. Dorcas was dedicated to care for the poor. And Phoebe had leadership position in the church in Greece. Their names can stand for many other women who served as faithful witnesses to the faith. And there's a verse here offered from Galatians: there is no longer Jew nor Greek, no longer slave or free, no longer male and female, for all of you are one in Christ Jesus. And so, as we look at our society today, we have a push to include more women in leadership roles, and that extends even to minorities, not just to women, to minorities and others who have not had an opportunity to serve as they might. And we see that the church, even centuries ago, 200 years ago, or 2,000 years ago even, the church was at the forefront of including women in leadership. And we know how important women are to the leadership of our churches today. So again, we commemorate Lydia, Dorcas, and Phoebe today. If you have some women in your life or meet some who are active in the church, please give them thanks for all that they've done to help with our Christian ministry. So our lesson, getting back to the lesson for this week, for the fourth Sunday after the Epiphany, is Mark 1, verses 21 to 28. If you would like to get your Bible and follow along, again, that is Mark 1, verses 21 to 28. A little introduction. The story has barely begun, and already the battle is joined. Jesus sides with humanity against every force that would bring death and disease. These forces recognize Jesus and know what his power means for them. This, however, is only the first fight. The war will go on much longer. Excuse me. So, the Holy Gospel according to St. Mark, the first chapter. They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was in their synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are. You are the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of him. They were all amazed, and they kept asking one another, "What is this? A new teaching, and with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So here we have a pretty amazing story, a story of Jesus casting out this unclean spirit at the very beginning of his ministry, right here in the very first chapter of Mark's gospel. As the introduction tells us, this is just the first fight in the battle, that the battle will rage on for quite some time. And in fact, we know that the battle is still being fought. Though we also know that Jesus has already won. Evil and Satan continue to fight with this world, continue to try to win us over away from Jesus and away from our faith in God. But that battle still continues. But we know that in the end, we win. Jesus is the winner, and we know how that battle ends up for the faithful. They here at the beginning of this is Jesus and his disciples. And these are the disciples that Jesus has just called. Over the last couple of weeks, we've heard the call of Jesus' first disciples, those fishermen that he called away from their fishing, Matthew, the tax collector. And so Jesus has these disciples with him. And so they go to the synagogue. And here again, we see this interesting. Jesus keeps the tradition, the Jewish tradition of worshiping on the holy day. He goes to the synagogue. He attends church. And, of course, apparently they didn't have any pandemics to keep them away from church in those days. But still, we have this sense that so many people today don't feel that church or worship in some sense is necessary, that worshiping community is not necessary. And yet it was necessary for Jesus. And so how much more for us? Whether we are able to gather here in our nave as we would like to do, whether we are gathering digitally, over these recorded services and recorded messages, there is still ways for us to come together and ways for us to maintain community. And that community, that worshiping community, was important to Jesus. And so he kept that tradition faithfully. Time and time again, we read how Jesus went to the synagogue on the Sabbath. He takes his disciples with him to the synagogue on the Sabbath. And so worship and prayer, how many times Jesus goes off by himself to pray, worship and prayer were mainstays of Jesus' faith and his faithfulness. And, I think that's the best example that we might have for our own worship life, our own faith life, is to take that time to worship in whatever way we can. Take that time for prayer and communicating with God that way. And again, we follow Jesus by doing what Jesus did. And two very main parts of Jesus' life and Jesus' faithfulness to us and his faithfulness to God the Father were worship and prayer. And so it's important that we take part in those things ourselves as well. This is the holy day. He goes to the holy place. For us, that holy day is usually Sunday. The Christian tradition is for that holy day to be Sunday, and it is a day to attend church or worship in whatever way we can. And so again, this is how we follow in the steps of Jesus. Jesus entered the synagogue and taught. Now, this is interesting. As we think of Jesus traveling, as he goes about a sort of itinerant ministry, that as he goes in the synagogue, he not only is there to worship, but he's also there to teach. And the verb tense of this word is such that it says, it would literally be, he began to teach. And we might say that as Jesus began to teach, he continued to teach throughout his whole earthly life, and still continues to teach us through the guidance of the Holy Spirit. So Jesus began to teach, and to teach in the synagogue that day, he would have had to have been invited. So it would be as if, a visiting pastor were in our church on Sunday, and I would invite that pastor to offer some message, to offer the sermon, however that might go. Jesus would have been invited to teach, and so he was recognized as a rabbi. So Jesus isn't just coming out of nowhere with no kind of background, with no kind of history, and just showing up here in the synagogue. In order to teach, he would have been recognized as a rabbi. And so we know that there is some history there. There is some background to Jesus that is recognized and realized by the leaders of the synagogue. And at this point, he hasn't started to engage in any conflict. He hasn't encountered any conflict with the religious leaders yet. It seems that at this point, they're still somewhat cooperative, again, allowing Jesus to teach in the synagogue. Their opinion may change somewhat when they see the influence Jesus has, when they hear some of what Jesus has to say. Their opinion, of course, changes to the point where they decide they need to crucify Jesus and be rid of him. But for now, that conflict has not yet started. The conflict in this passage is between Jesus and the unclean spirits, not between Jesus and the religious leaders. And of course, we find that Jesus wins that battle with the unclean spirit quite easily. So he begins teaching in the synagogue, and they were astounded. The they here is the crowd, the people who were attending the synagogue, the other worshipers, probably the other worship leaders, other rabbis who may have been there. All who were there listening to Jesus were astounded at his teaching. Again, we might wonder what was so astounding about Jesus' teaching. Was it what he had to say, the content of his teaching? Was it how he presented his teaching? And I think in the end, we're going to see that it was both the content and the presentation, the way in which he taught. As it says in the next sentence, he taught them as one having authority. Again, this is interesting. We get to see here a union of teaching and authority that carries over even to the people's exclamation at the end. What is this? A new teaching with authority. What is this authority that Jesus shows? Now we know that the scribes, the rabbis, were teachers in the synagogue. They, of course, had the authority of their education, the authority of their learning. Scribes were experts on the law. They were religious attorneys, more or less, religious lawyers. And we know that their authority, or so-called authority, came from their education and their teaching. So what is this authority that Jesus has? When you talk to someone who really knows what they're talking about, someone who's really passionate about what they're teaching, it really shows. Their authority comes through more so than, I might compare it to when I was in seminary. I did some substitute teaching through a guest teachers program with the intermediate unit. And there was a big difference between the way the regular teacher would teach and the way I would teach, because I didn't have authority. I could teach just about any kind of class. I taught everything from home ec to gym class to whatever, wherever a substitute was needed. But I didn't teach, of course, with the same kind of authority as their regular teacher did. So I had the authority of being an adult. I had authority given to me by the school district and by the intermediate unit to be there and lead that class, but I didn't have the same authority as a teacher who really knew what they were talking about. And some of the teachers that I met were really passionate about what they taught and passionate about teaching the children. And so their authority came through in a very special way. And I think this is what we see with Jesus. His authority is more than just knowledge. It is a passion. It is him. What greater authority could there be than the Son of God? And so we have Jesus coming through with this authority as he teaches. Just then, or suddenly, there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit. So we have a quick change in the scene here, a quick change in the situation. First, we had Jesus, the holy man, the rabbi, at least, if he wasn't recognized as anything else, in a holy place, the synagogue, on a holy day. And so this is a very holy scene that we see, a sacred scene, if you will. And all of a sudden, this unclean spirit shows up. This unclean spirit does not belong there. This isn't the place for an unclean spirit. And so he's totally out of place in the scene here, especially as Mark tells the story. Just to share a little bit from Brian Stoffagen, a thought about this unclean spirit being there and how it relates to us today. Lest anyone be offended by what I'm about to read, remember I am quoting Brian Stoffagen, but it is great food for thought. He says, the unclean spirit is in a holy place on a holy day where it ought not to be. Do we have any such people in our congregations? In our congregation who show up for worship on Sunday mornings? That's during normal times, of course. Do we think that there are people who ought not to be there? Have you ever looked around and said, what are they doing in church? Perhaps we know things about their background. Perhaps you know these people personally, and you know something about their background. What are they doing in church? And he gives some examples. Longtime members who stifle any attempts at modernizing the church. Young children who would rather play than pay attention and participate in the worship. An autistic youth. An unwed mother and her noisy child. A smelly truck driver. A person with AIDS. A police officer in uniform with his weapon. A woman who had been arrested for prostitution. A man who just got out of prison for molesting children, etc. Should such people be there? And of course, it doesn't offer yes or no. This is, in a sense, a rhetorical question, but it is true. What kinds of people belong in church? And, we say, of course, everyone belongs in church. But how do we feel when we encounter those people in church? Just from this scene, we wonder, why is this unclean spirit here? What is this man doing here in church with this unclean spirit? He's there to confront Jesus. It is evil confronting the divine. It is evil confronting the Holy One. And, of course, evil again is still at work. And so if we have people in our church who we don't think should be there, to put it that way, we don't think these people belong in church, It is a way that evil confronts us. It is a way that evil puts us to the test, as this unclean spirit is there to test Jesus. How will we respond? How will we react? And how will this evil, this unclean spirit affect us? So let's see what happens with Jesus here. The unclean spirit cries out. The unclean spirit tries to take control. It speaks in a loud voice. You know how when somebody wants to take control of an argument, they get louder and louder and louder, and they want to take over the conversation. This unclean spirit cries out with a loud voice. What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? This is, again, the us here. It's the forces of evil. This unclean spirit represents the forces of evil. It's not just one spirit, as if, there's, I don't know how powerful unclean spirits might be, but this is more than just one manifestation of evil, if you will. This is the forces of evil. This is us. And, he's saying to Jesus, what do we have in common? What have you to do with us? Mind your own business. Leave us alone. This is a time to see if the evil will have influence over the good, or the good will have influence over the evil. For Jesus, it's not much of a contest. Jesus, of course, is the Son of God. For us, it's a different story. When we confront evil, we need to rely on Jesus. We need to turn our faith to Jesus in order to be able to overcome whatever evil might be trying to overcome and control us. And again, as we think about those who we might consider unclean coming into our congregation, writer Ben Witherington offers this comment on Jesus' interaction with the unclean spirit. What one notices about Jesus' behavior is that he is never worried about becoming unclean or sick by fraternizing or touching the spiritually or physically or morally unclean. Indeed, he seems to have gone out of his way in some cases to minister to them. Not surprisingly, this behavior offended those who were part of the holiness movement of that day, the Pharisaic movement. The question a text like Mark 1 raises for us is, are we more concerned with public opinion and with not offending some people by being compassionate to society's outcasts, or are we more concerned with helping those in the greatest need in our society? The answer to this question in Jesus' case seems obvious from the very outset in Mark. Jesus did not particularly care whom he scandalized if he believed he was doing God's work and helping to bring in God's dominion. He was also more concerned with who got the cure than who got the credit. Public opinion. What do people think of us? What do people think of our church? One experience that really stands out in my mind, and I've talked to some of you about this already, perhaps. We had a funeral here at the church for Robin Mamola, who many of you knew. Robin had attended a church in the city that apparently had a lot of Latino, a lot of Hispanic members, and they knew that the church wasn't big enough for her funeral. So they had the funeral here at St. Mark's. They asked if they could have it here. We said yes. There was some conflict with people parking across the street in the church center, where we have, we had used the parking lot there before. There was, in a sense, an overwhelming number of people. We hadn't asked permission. Some things happened, whatever. Well, when I went over to the church center to talk to someone about trying to smooth over the issue and, to apologize for any problems that might have been caused by the folks that were here, the person I talked to, when I explained the situation, said, "Oh, I wondered what was going on because," or no, he said, "I wondered what kind of people you were attracting because they didn't seem like the typical Lutheran demographic." And, it struck me that that person was very narrow-minded because with a large number of Latinos and others coming to that service. And of course, he has this picture of Lutherans, as many people do. And I've often, lamented the fact when people think of Lutheran, they think of, middle-aged, middle-class white folks. And, but to think that, he was concerned about this demographic that we were attracting here at our church because they didn't fit his usual picture of Lutherans. I think we need to be careful that we don't allow that kind of public opinion to become so pervasive that folks who don't fit the stereotype of Lutherans, and we may not think of being stereotyped because, as being the majority for a long time is, again, middle-aged, middle-class white folks, we haven't been subject to stereotyping as much. But we need to be careful that we don't, so that we know these people are welcome and they know they are welcome in our church, and hopefully in other Christian congregations as well. So that kind of, is what I think of when I think about this idea of public opinion, when I think about, who is welcome in our congregation and how do we interact with those people? How well do we welcome them? So this unclean spirit, of course, says to Jesus, "What have you to do with us? What do we have in common?" And it tells Jesus basically to leave us alone. The unclean spirit says, "Now I," this one unclean spirit representing the forces of evil, says, "I know who you are." And this is an attempt to control Jesus. This is an attempt for the unclean spirit to take control. If you know someone's name, it's easy to control them. I've often heard that you shouldn't put a child's name on their clothing or their backpacks because someone can call them by name. It's much easier for them to have control over that child and perhaps get them to do things they shouldn't do. So he says, "I know who you are," and he calls him the Holy One of God. Again, interestingly, the unclean spirits recognize who Jesus is before the religious authorities or just about anyone else does. But Jesus now takes control. Jesus shows the unclean spirit that he will not be controlled by it or them. However, we look at that spirit as a representative of evil. He says, "Be silent and come out of him." And with just a word, Jesus takes control. All he has to do is say the word, be silent and come out. He takes control. The unclean spirit puts up a fight. The unclean spirit doesn't come out without a struggle. He convulses the man. He cries in a loud voice. Again, we have these unclean spirits who don't want to let go of us. The forces of evil don't want to let go of us. And yet when we count on Jesus, when we call on Jesus for his help, then he has the strength and the power to control these unclean spirits. And now this man is restored, not only physically, but socially. He can become a part of his social circle. He can become a part of, once again, the worshiping community and the rest of the community. So Jesus healing the unclean spirit, Jesus driving out the unclean spirit, also restores him to this sense of community that we talked about being so important to our faith life. And now the people realize this is a new teaching with authority. We see here that teaching that Jesus did wasn't just what he said, but it was also what he did. Teaching is influence, teaching is action, teaching has an effect. And we see all of those in what Jesus did. He drove out the unclean spirit by his actions, and it had the effect of people recognizing him as one with authority. And so his fame now begins to spread. So Jesus didn't teach as the scribes did, simply with book learning and that kind of knowledge. Jesus taught from his heart. Jesus taught from his very being. Jesus taught by what he did and the power that he showed. And so people now recognize Jesus as, if not the Messiah, as someone different, someone special, someone powerful. And so here we see Jesus now gaining fame, and along with that fame will come more conflict. It will come different types of conflict, but again, Jesus remains faithful to the very end. So again, Jesus has authority. Jesus has power. The unclean spirits recognize him. The unclean spirits are afraid of him. And, that's good for us, that we know Jesus has that kind of power. I really didn't set a timer today, so I don't know if I think I'm probably a little bit over my half hour. But I hope you, again, enjoyed this Bible study. Again, always open to feedback, and whatever happens in the future, we will continue to record Bible study, even if we return to live Bible study, or when we return to live Bible study, we'll have some way of recording that and posting it. So if you're not able to be here for whatever reason, you will be able to still be a part of our Wednesday Bible study. So let's close with the Lord's Prayer. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen. Thank you. You will see me Sunday, and I will see you as soon as possible.